said she's going to Tulsa this week. Oh, God.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Hello. Thank you for coming. Thank you for braving the weather again. I know it seems like, for whatever reason, we seem to be getting inclement weather every time we do this now. So we're going to pray for good weather in May. Just want to thank you again for coming and give you a couple of quick little updates of things that are going to be coming up in the next few weeks at the museum. We've obviously got Easter this weekend, and we will be closed on Saturday in observance of Easter. We've got our next Coffee with the Curator is going to be on May 4th, I believe. And the topic of that is going to be the history of Stuttgart's two parks. So that'd be John Kane Park and J.B. Bryant Park. Also in May, we're going to be kicking off a donor campaign. So it's going to be, we're going to call it Love the Museum in May. And so we're going to have a lot of different things. I'm going to be encouraging the parents who like to come during the summer months for projects on the prairie and some other things to maybe bring their kiddos over and help with what we like to call community love. Not so much community service, but we just need a little help around here. And the kids, as I learned last weekend, my own nephew loves to pick up limbs and rake leaves and pull weeds. And so I think the kids would get a big kick out of it. We also have got our new archiving system up and running thanks to Miss Susie Kazire. So if you would like to see the process of how we're going to be inputting all of our artifacts into this system and documenting all of that, we would love to have your help and support if you want to come over for 30 minutes or 15 minutes or a day, however long. And then we'll also be working on our annual donor campaign. So my goal this year is not just to raise money, but it's to prove to all of our donors how we're stewarding those funds and educating and promoting the community, but also preserving our Grand Prairie heritage. Then in June, we've got projects on the prairie coming up. I know we've got 4 of our projects already set.
Yes. Soon to be 5. They've got to call me back.
One of which is going to be on the history of the Stuttgart Fire Department, and that will be led by the Stuttgart Fire Department, so we're really excited about that. Another one of our topics is going to be early cooking on the Arkansas Grand Prairie, so the kids will get to see a demonstration of how meals got made over a cauldron outside by the cabin. And we'll have our ladies' luncheon. Victorian luncheon is coming up June 22nd. Of course, this will all be in print before long. But we've got some interesting topics and catering setup and things like that. So, with that, and then the other big thing for June is we will be kicking off our next seasonal exhibit. It will tie into our June Coffee with Curator topic. Which is going to be, I believe, on June 8th, not the 1st. Yeah. So it's going to be the 2nd Thursday in June because that first Thursday follows Memorial Day and most people are out of town. But that is going to be on the Grand Prairie Grand Prix. So for anybody who's got an interest in the old races and things that went on out there, we'd love for you to join us. And with that, I give you Jesse Walsh and Traps Across the Prairie.
So our programs always tend to start with a question or just a spark of curiosity. And in this case, that question is one that we've heard a lot over the years, and we've kind of wondered about it ourselves, for those of us who are still learning. And that is, what happened to Stuttgart's train depot? Or sometimes, just Stuttgart had a train depot. And yeah, we did. We actually had a couple or a few. So today we want to share with you what we know, what we've learned about what ultimately became of them. And this is just, what we're talking about today. I think a lot of you in the room already remember it, remember seeing it before, but this comes from an old vintage postcard. And of course, it's also over there in painting, in oils. And this was built in 1910, so it's actually not the very, very first. We kind of had two first depots. Because see, the railroad went through Stuttgart after it was completed in 1883, but they wouldn't stop for us because we needed to have a post office, and we also needed to have a depot that was built close enough, to the tracks. Makes sense. And so at the time, folks were coming to Stuttgart. When they would come to Stuttgart, they would actually have to stop over in Goldman, 5 miles away, and then they would have to backtrack those 5 miles by wagon or by foot or horse. And so naturally, everyone who was invested in the development of Stuttgart was really itching to get a depot built, to get it to stop here and make access to town a lot easier for folks. And this is actually an ad for the Cotton Belt from 1883 when it was completed in this area, and it boasts about its all new steel lines that are unequaled by any in the West. But there were two separate groups at that time who were trying to get a depot built. There were two main groups. You had the Burkles, which owned property on the north side of town, and they had big plans to develop that side. And then on the south side, you had a group of promoters that included the Wrench family, as well as Isaac Harper, Henry Flood, and others, among others. And they were interested in developing that side of town. They were actually making pretty rapid growth over there. And so it became a race, who could get their depot erected first. And in 1884, the Burkles were approached by a character named Henry Cagwin, and he had a proposal for them to develop all that land. And so he entered into a contract with the Burkles, and the deal was, not only was he supposed to build the depot, but also a town hall, a high school, a church, a gristmill, a factory, and more. And according to the contract, Cagwin was made a trustee and held the title to some of the Burkles' land. But if he didn't complete the project within the allotted time, it would get returned to the Burkles. And I don't really know all the legalese on that, but that's just my layman's understanding. So he did get the depot built about a month late in 1885, but the other projects just totally fell through. And in the time that it took Cagwin to build his depot, the South Side promoters had already completed their own. And there had been an official who worked for the Cotton Belt who had promised the Burkles that their depot would be the one to get used. Their depot was built on the north side of the tracks, and the south side, on the south side. He had promised that their depot would be the one to get used, but in the interim there, that man left his job, the south side got their depot finished, and a new guy came on the scene, and those south side promoters, convinced him that their depot would be the better option. And so that's how it was. That was our depot until the new one was built. And so this is just kind of a map for a little bit of modern day context as to where that Southside depot was. It is unclear if the North Side depot was directly across, or if it was kind of one way or the other to the east or the west. But that is where it sat. That's where the Southside one sat until the new one was. And I'm really excited that we actually have some interior photos of the depot, because we don't always get that lucky. A lot of these businesses and buildings we can find exterior photos for, but this time we have interior photos, and this one shows the ticket booth as well as the telegraph services over there to the right. And then our other photo here looks to be what they would call the less than carload area. And that would be things like packages and trunks like the one you see here, and so that just kind of had to do with the rates, less than a carload versus a full carload of freight. And then we're going to backtrack just a little bit, kind of to the beginning, to explain the Cotton Belt route as a whole. The story of the Cotton Belt route goes back several years before Stuttgart even existed. You'll see here on this map a little section of railroad down there in East Texas called the Tyler Tap. For those of us in the room, I don't know how many of it's going to be, but for those of us in the room who aren't railroad buffs, a tap line is like a shorter railroad that connects a place to like a pre-existing larger line, and so it's usually controlled by or determined by industry, right? So your community has a product and you want to be able to ship it far and wide, so you want to, connect your community to those railroads, that way you have access to that. And so in Tyler's case, in the case of Tyler, Texas, that product was cotton. And so in 1871, a company was formed to build a railroad that would connect Tyler to those other railroads, allowing them to ship their cotton. And so through a series of purchases and newly constructed lines, a belt that stretched from East Texas all the way to St. Louis was formed, hence the Cotton Belt. And this map indicates, like which lines were built by who and when, and it's really a cool map. It comes to us from this really small booklet that was the Cotton Belt News, the Cotton Belt's own publication. And I just love that little thing. It's very helpful. And you may also notice that there's a little stretch here that connects Stuttgart to Gillette. Land agents who worked for both railroad interests and also real estate interests were enticing developers and just folks looking for a new place to live to come to the Grand Prairie. And at that time, the name that comes up over and over again when we're talking about land deals and real estate in that time is Leslie. Thomas Leslie was a banker and a promoter for Stuttgart. He and his family, which included his sons and his brother, they were heavily involved in all sorts of deals and projects to put both Stuttgart and Gillette on the map. And among the many developments on the prairie that the Leslies were involved in was the forming of the Stuttgart and Arkansas River Railroad Company. That they formed this company in 1888, and it came into being with the goal of building a railroad that would connect Stuttgart to Gillette. And Thomas Leslie was secretary of the company, and Francis Gillette, who the town was later named after, would be named after, was the president of that company at the time. This picture here actually shows construction of that line. This was taken right around DeWitt area, but it's pretty cool to see the process of the lines being built. And as you saw in the map, the Cotton Belt actually acquired this stretch of line in 1901. They had some financial difficulties at the time, and so it just kind of worked out better for the Cotton Belt to absorb it. And the Leslies were also involved in another railroad adjacent project that actually was meant to make navigating within Stuttgart a little bit easier. They were part of something called the Stuttgart Improvement Company, which was also formed in 1888. And one of their earliest projects was to place a streetcar system here in town that would connect the Cotton Belt Depot to the fairgrounds on the south side of town. And so it went, from the depot to Second, and then over to Main, down to Fourth, and then over to Grand Avenue, and all the way and south all the way to the fairgrounds. And so the streetcar system itself was pretty short-lived, but while it was here, one of its functions was actually to deliver out-of-town students and their luggage from the depot to Stuttgart's college, which was on the way to the fairgrounds. And so I just really enjoyed, as I've been researching this, I really enjoyed seeing little snippets of other things we've talked about, like the college and the Rice Carnival. And you get a little excited when you recognize names too, just oh yeah, I remember that guy. I feel like I know him now. And so Stuttgart changed a lot in those first few decades of the railroad, naturally. In the first 25 years, we went from harvesting hay as our primary industry to a really rapidly growing rice industry. And the success of rice and then soybeans led to so many more developments, not just, you know, economically, but also culturally for us. You know, the success of rice led to the Rice Carnival, and then the Rice Carnival was, you know, the predecessor to the festival we have today. And so what I see whenever I look at the history of the railroad is this kind of ripple effect, that I mean, it just played such a crucial role in our growth, you know. And just as the depot impacted the town's growth kind of turned around and impacted the depot as well. It was around the 1950s when the Cotton Belt's passenger services started to die out. You know, the world was changing, and more people had cars of their own, and air travel was becoming more common, you know. And so, you know, the needs, folks' travel needs changed, and the economy around travel changed. And so the Cotton Belt's response was, you know, to kind of eliminate the dining cars, and then the sleeping car services were reduced, and then eventually we just had coach services between Pine Bluff and St. Louis only, just that section of the route. And then in 1959, the last passenger services came to an end. And since Rock Island's passenger services had already stopped by 1930, that left Stuttgart as freight only. And so that's just, you know, that's how it continued to be in those later years. And the needs of our community changed, and our local industry had changed, and eventually Riceland, which had, you know, grown up around the depot, you know, you can see in the background of this photo just how much the industry in town has grown compared to the earlier photo where you couldn't really see anything much behind it. It had grown up all around it, and they found a need for the lot that the depot sat on. And so in January of 1987, the Cotton Belt Depot was torn down. But some pieces of the depot were actually saved. One that I particularly love is this bit of stained glass here. It comes to us from Miss Susie, who you guys saw up front. She was able to save this piece as things were being torn down. And she also brought to us these framed things here, let's see, this is the memo telling people not to break into cars and steal from the cars. And then this very interesting, it's like a sea level marker. It's a benchmark that says how many feet above sea level we are in this area. And it says not to remove it, but here it is. And anyway, so we're really glad that some of these pieces are saved and cherished. And of course, the painting over here, this framed painting is made from, the frame is made from some of the door facing of the depot. And this painting brings us to someone else that we owe a great deal to today. We owe many thanks to Jim Bennett, who of course, of course he's no longer with us, but we couldn't have done this program without him. Not only did he write a good portion of my source material for this program, but and he commissioned this painting, and he built the frame, and the painting itself was done by Edith Andrews. He also made a great effort to save the depot before it was torn down. One of the ways he did that was getting it nominated for the National Register of Historic Places. And the depot was originally meant to come down many years before it actually did, I believe 1977, a full 10 years before it actually did. And so, I mean, he clearly put in a great, very valiant effort to say that. And even though the depot did eventually get demolished, all of his work to preserve the story of the depot still benefits us today. Through his writing, through this painting, and through our depot exhibit over on the west side building there, which he built. He cared so deeply for the railroad and its history, and especially our depot. And it's easy to see why, because his family history is tied very closely to the depot and the railroad. The Bennett family, it was actually his father, not even that far back, came to the Grand Prairie via the Cotton Belt in 1886, just like about a year after the depot was completed. And he's not the only one. I wonder how many of families that came to Stuttgart that same way, and how many of those families are still here today. That's kind of a question I'd really like to know. I'd love to kind of dig through some of those old records and see just how many family names we still recognize as being local here. And so, this is your family history too. And so even though we're all sad that the depot isn't here anymore, I'm glad that we still have enough that we can continue to tell its story and learn more about it, because this is entry-level stuff. I don't know nearly as much as the folks who actually worked there, which I know some of you are here, including Susie, who's way over there. But yeah, I'd really love to hear your memories and hear what you have to say about the depot. This is kind of the end of my soapbox here.
I don't think.